In this movie, I'll introduce you to the 6 remaining Pathfinder operations, divide through minus back. And the first thing to know about them is none of them allow you to create a custom shape, which is why they get their own row down here at the bottom of the Pathfinder panel. The other thing to know is that they're a very uneven utility. A couple of them, divide and minus back, are quite useful. The others are just plain weird, but I figure you'd still like to know how they work. So here goes. I'm going to start off by zooming into divide, and notice that these guys have daggers or double daggers next to them, and I'll explain what that's about in the next movie. But for now, I'll go ahead and marquee these 2 shapes here, the purple square and the green ring, and I'll click on the first icon in the second row, divide. And what that's done is it's divided the paths according to how they overlap. Now notice once again we have a group. We will after every one of these operations. And so I'll go up to the object menu and choose the ungroup command, or better still, in the future, I'll just press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac. And now notice that I can drag this guy away. We also have this little sliver right there and this piece. And we have one more invisible path that I have to kind of hunt around for here. I've got my smart guides on, by the way, is why it's highlighting. But notice that my arrow cursor has a little square next to it, which shows me that there's something under it right now. And so when I click, I will select that path. And just to make it visible, I'll press the D key to apply the default fill and stroke. And I'll right-click on the path, choose Arrange, and choose Bring to Front, which also has a keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-Right bracket. That's Command-Shift-Right bracket on the Mac, another one that I will be using in the future because this happens a lot. Many of these Pathfinder operations have a habit of tracing the negative space. All right, so you can see how that might be useful. You'd want to divide up your path outlines and then reunite them using the unite operation. So that's typically what people do with that one. Trim, I'm not sure anybody does anything with. What happens is after you get done marqueing your 2 paths, then you click on trim, and it basically uses the forward path to trim a hole in the path behind it. Problem is, for reasons that have always defied me, it throws away the strokes. And so I'll go ahead and press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac to ungroup these shapes. And then I'll click off them. I'll go ahead and move this guy down so you can see that the square has been broken, but the ring has not been broken. And then we've got an invisible path. I'll go ahead and find it by pressing Control-Y or Command-Y on the Mac in order to switch to the outline mode. And then I'll click on it, of course, to select it, and I'll press Control-Y or Command-Y again. And I'll go ahead and drag this guy over here and bring him to the front by pressing Control-Shift-Right bracket or Command-Shift-Right bracket on the Mac, and I'll tap the D key in order to give it its default colors. All right, so that's trim for you. You might like it, you might not. You might find a use for it. I certainly never do, but it's there. All right, now let's look at merge, which is also a strange one. It unites shapes much like Unite does, but it does so according to their fill colors. So the stroke color doesn't matter at all, just the fill color. And so I'll go ahead and click on merge, which is the 3rd icon on the 2nd row, and we end up with this effect. Again, like trim, it throws away the strokes. But now what I'll do is press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac in order to ungroup these shapes. I'll shift-click on these 2 guys, so this green ring has been married to the green rectangle, and the purple rectangle has been changed to this shape that sort of runs through to the other side, so it's still one shape. But then we have these negative space tracings as well. I'll bring them to the front by pressing Control-Shift-Right bracket, Command-Shift-Right bracket on the Mac, and I'll tap the D key so that we can see those otherwise invisible shapes. And I'll just kind of move these guys around so you can see what they look like. All right, now let's check out crop. Crop uses the forward shape to clip the rear one. So notice if I click on crop, which is the 4th icon on the bottom row, we get rid of the rectangle. It's disappeared. But notice if I go ahead and press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac in order to ungroup these shapes, I'll go ahead and drag this guy over, and then I'll just kind of marquee this area and tap the D key. You can see that we actually have the inner circle now cut away from the outer one, and we have that clipped ring left over as well. So if you're trying to do some hard crops, this might be something that you're interested in, although once again, it gets rid of the stroke. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to this guy right here, outline, and I'll marquee it. This one's a little bit like divide, but notice if I go ahead and click on outline, which is the second to last icon on the bottom row, we lose the fills, and actually the fills and strokes get swapped with each other so that we have the light purple and the light green for our strokes now. We also get, very strangely, a line weight value of 0 point, which is not something you can normally even enter in Illustrator. That just sets your stroke to none. But in the case of this operation, it gives us actually a 1 point stroke. Just so we can see things a little better, though, I'll go ahead and raise that line weight to 3 points, and I'll press Control-Shift-G or Command-Shift-G on the Mac in order to ungroup the path outlines. And now I'll just move these guys. And you can see what we get is a bunch of open paths that have been divided away from each other, tons and tons. So at each intersection, we get a different open path outline. And in fact, this is the one and only Pathfinder operation that delivers open paths. Every single one of the other ones leaves you with closed paths. All right, and finally we have minus back, which is the opposite, as you might expect, of minus front. Minus front is oftentimes very useful, as is minus back. You have to apply it as a static operation, however. But notice, if I go ahead and marquee these 3 paths, we're going to cut the 2 rear paths, that is to say the purple square and the pink triangle, from the single forward path, which is the green ring. And you can see that if I go ahead and click on the icon, we end up with those 2 paths being cut away from the green ring to produce this effect right here. All right, so there you have it, folks. That's how you take advantage of the 6 static Pathfinder operations, starting with divide and ending with minus back here inside Illustrator.